Hi, welcome to the Inspired Living with Ellen Broderick podcast. Each week I interview a guest who has found passion in their life and has pursued it. And this week, my guest is Rachel Fletcher. And Rachel is a geometer and a teacher of geometry and proportion to design practitioners. She has an MFA in theater design from Humboldt State University and an MA in dramatic literature from SUNY Albany. Was for many years the co-chair of the African American Heritage of the Upper Housatonic Valley Committee. And she started the Riverwalk, which is a project that has gone for over 30 years that took the river in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, which had really become a dump. And she took that vision and really inspired the entire community, engaged school kids, church groups, so many people over many, many years to make that the center of the town, really make it the beautiful spot that the DuBois had envisioned. And as the entry to that park, Rachel was the original creator and had the idea for the W.E.B. Du Bois Memorial Rain Garden. So there are so many ways that Rachel has inspired her community and led her community to do the things that have really been in her heart to follow through on. So Rachel, welcome. And
hello there, Ellen. We go back a long way.
we do. So Rachel, you've done we worked together on the African American heritage work for, I think it was 10 years. It might have been a little bit more than that.
Yeah.
And also, I was involved in enjoying the work that you and so many other people did with the Riverwalk over so many years. And I think a few years ago, you handed that the baton for that over to another group. I don't know if you'd like to say anything about how that project started and the whole process.
Well, I can give you it's 30 years I was involved with it, so I'll try to keep it brief, but I want to open it by saying once I reached a kind of 30-year period, I turned it over to Christine Ward, who very, because she has many projects of her own, very generously has taken over that project for me, and I couldn't wish for a better successor. I feel so blessed, so lucky. I think it was good for me to be in that position while we were turning a completely abused and devastated riverbank into really a linear park along the river. And, sort of starting from scratch. But Christine, now that it is kind of up and the native plantings are established and the place itself is established, it's less about really thousands of volunteers building it and creating it, and now more about programs for families, for students, for it's one of the world's great outdoor classrooms, really, because it isn't just a lot of ecological work that's been done along the riverbank, completely reclaiming, the bank itself, clearing it out of, oh my gosh, I can't remember how many tons, 500 tons. I don't know. It was a lot of refuse, including the remains of a burned out building that had by necessity been pushed over the bank and just left to sit there for many years. So it was a matter of taking that up and then dealing with the invasive vegetation, which had completely taken over. And so over that 30 years, we really reclaimed the riverbank for, for more native vegetation. We put a half a mile of trail through there, and strictly for walking, although it's accessible in one part, one half of it is accessible with wheelchair. And that's kind of what we did. Along the reason it's such a great outdoor classroom is that, we have tree identification, we have, I'm trying to think of the other things that we have, tree identification, edible plants, just learning invasive plants of dealing with that, riverbank stabilization with very simple materials that people can use that don't require machinery to stabilize the bank in very natural ways. So, at that level, and then there's the history of that particular section of riverbank that goes right through the center of Great Barrington. It is what you call the river, the rain garden. It's a common mistake. It does include a rain garden, but it is an actual park. And it's the river park. And it is exactly the spot which W.E.B. Du Bois was referring to when he said he was born by a golden river in the shadow of two great hills. So once we figured that out, we named it for him. And only after that did we discover that he really, what an advocate he had been, not just for the Housatonic, but for rivers around the world. So it's one of the spots on the African American Heritage Trail. And it tells the story of an aspect of Du Bois's passions and advocacy that can only be told there at that spot, because this is really where it started for him. And he gave a speech. He wasn't always considered a pariah. He was actually invited back to the Berkshires to give a speech to Searle's school alumni. And he decided to give it on the Housatonic River, and really described for that river a vision that we had been working for 30 years, as if he had been directing us from the grave, really. So, so we do programs having to do with his advocacy for environmental justice, for biodiversity, and its connection to social diversity, racial diversity. And then, of course, we have, it is also right at the spot across the river where William Stanley developed the alternating current, the transformer that enabled alternating current to step up and step down electricity. So that was a big thing. And what was really interesting to us about it is that those transformers the transformer that he developed, he went up to Pittsfield, became General Electric, and decades later, because they were prone with that kind of intense stepping up and stepping down, they were prone to catch fire. And so as fire retardants, they were encased in PCBs. And so GE, as we all know now, just flagrantly disposed of them, not only in the river, but largely in the river. And so the whole PCB infliction on the Housatonic River, in a certain sense, began at that spot where he developed those transformers. So there's, it's packed with a lot of history as well as ecology, and Christine is just wonderful in the way in which she reaches out. Bird watching is another thing that's a big thing there. So there was my typical run-on sentence to answer your question, and I've never been able to break that habit.
No, it's a great thorough response, Rachel. And one of the things that people may not know is that the reason that DuBois knew that particular spot in the river so intimately was that he was born there.
He was born there, and he spent the first 2 years. But his boyhood was actually spent out on the home site. It was the Egremont Plain, but still Great Barrington. And but that it had a profound effect on him. Every autobiography or account of his life that to my knowledge, that he ever wrote, always began with, "I was born by a golden river in the shadow of two great hills." And he meant by that the potential for the river to have, to be an enormous resource, spiritually, ecologically, all of that. But he was also ironically referring to the yellow effluent that was coming downstream from the mills upstream. So it was always in his mind, this double connection to the river, being just terribly, I don't know what the word would be, but it was very painful for him to see this great resource abused the way that it was. And at the same time, he always saw the great potential that it had. So so when he said he was born by a golden river, the river moves, and in that spot it actually moves away from away from where his birth site was. So his birth site, when he was born, the actual river went through where that park is right now. Someone from Foresight Land Services pulled out an old survey map and said, "This is where the river was. This is really the spot he was referring to." So when we do programs there, it's a pretty profound feeling to know that you are sitting right there where this whole passion was ignited for him. I think it's one of the reasons why it's so important to tell the story of DuBois is forming in Great Barrington, not just from the environmental point of view, but for social action, so many other aspects that were important to him, because this was his first exposure to having the experiences that shaped his life, and to be in that spot, where these things happened, it's as I say, it's the only place where that part of the story can be told with real impact. So yeah.
Yeah, so important, and such a contribution to the Berkshire community, and particularly to Great Barrington. So let's move from there to the was it 10 or 12 years that you spent co-chairing the African American Heritage for the Upper Housatonic Valley committee, and you co-chaired it with
Francis
Jones-Sneed.
Yeah. We sort of, Francis is really the one who knows the history I, I, I,
And can I just say that Frances was a history teacher at Mass College of Liberal Arts?
right, well, and she's emeritus now, and um, has really done all kinds of with mass humanities and all kinds of research, and she just has it's informed, and it's also a rather poetic sense of what it meant in this tiny little, with very small African American population, part of the world, how it was possible that it wasn't just W.E.B. Du Bois came up out of here, but Elizabeth Freeman and Agrippa Hall and James Vanderzee. And I mean, it's just, the list goes on and on from the Revolutionary War on up. So, yeah, there's no one like Frances that expresses what, the richness of that story. So I got involved only because when the Du Bois River Park became a thing, when it was dedicated, it became very clear that at the time it was really the only public destination, and it was so not sufficient to honor this man. So I made promises to particularly Elaine Gunn, who had been for decades with others, working to have Du Bois a part of the curriculum, to have the home site where he was raised, and where his Burkhart ancestry was.
Burkhart being the B in W.E.B. Du Bois.
That's right, William Edward Burkhart Du Bois, W.E.B. Du Bois. I was really new on the scene with all of this African American stuff, but I had promised Elaine and others who had worked so hard to, have that legacy established, and to remove the disdain that this community had for him for, well, we won't go into that part, but so I promised them that I would work to get the home site properly recognized. It was a National Historic Landmark since the late 60s, but it had been abandoned for fear of vandalism, and there was quite a controversy of having it at all. And so by the time I came on the scene, it existed, but no one could find it because it was under a tangle of vines and weeds. The scholars would come and say, no, there really isn't a home site. And it was buried. So it occurred to me that one way to get it recognized and to pressure the caretakers, which is UMass Amherst, into paying attention, was to create an African American heritage trail, put it on the site, put it on the map, along with, at the Trustees of Reservations, the John Ashley House, where people were not paying attention to the real story there, it seemed to me, which was the story of Elizabeth Freeman. That's where she sued for her freedom, or
this is in the 1780s.
Right. Yeah. Don't ask me for dates. Not at 75 years old. I cannot remember any dates anymore. But, and then there was Samuel Harrison. He was the chaplain for the 54th Regiment, and he was, instrumental in really advocating for equal pay, or getting, wonder if getting paid at all, for Black soldiers. And but yeah, and so and the more we look, the more they just came out of the woodwork. James Vanderzee he became the photographer that he became with these early photographs of his family and the Berkshire landscape. And James Weldon Johnson wrote many of his works there in Great Barrington. So, right. Yeah, so, and then what also became clear to us, and maybe it's why this, what was supposed to be a little 15-page pamphlet became a 250-page book, was that the story was equally remarkable when you took into account the accomplishments of ordinary people. You know, there's the history of the greats, and then there's the history of the rest of us, and we tried to balance those. And I mean, it was thrilling, and you were on that committee, and so we had Reverend Esther Dozier of Clinton AME Zion Church. We had several activists. We had several educators and university professors, and it was just a wide group. It was such a diverse group. People who had been trying to do this through oral histories, people who were working on it now. You were doing a really intensive oral history program at that point and developing the curriculum for Berkshire's Country Day School. You were working very closely with maybe my most important mentor, which was Skip Mead. So it was a wonderful time for us to be together as a collective to make this, to discover what was going on and to bring all these different perspectives. And I have to say is, I guess we were, it's a very small African-American population, but I think we were about half and half. And for me, I don't know how to even put this into words. I never know how. But I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, on the Mason-Dixon line, and with a lot of bigotry and bias ingrained into me as a child. And at the same time, I went to a progressive school where intellectually I knew this was preposterous, but those early childhood, what's ingrained is very, it stays forever. And this, for me, among other things, it was a wonderful opportunity to work through those biases, confront them, realize biases, at least some, I'm sure there are many, many more, unconscious that I was still carrying with me, in an environment where people can be honest, but it was a very trusting environment. And it was quite an opportunity for me, and I would love to see those kinds of forums kind of happen naturally, in trusting environments rather than confrontational environments. I think we could move together as a society in a much richer and less polarized way. I think we forget about the relationship between trust and vulnerability, how one is, they're really codependent. And anyway, that was one, it was sort of a personal aside, but it was such an honor. And we had great debates. The one that ended up as an essay in the book was, do you capitalize the B in Black? And, our anthropologists had a very specific reason for, with complete respect, for not capitalizing it. And then the activists like Skip said, oh no, and he pulled out that New York Times where every, white was capital, everything was capitalized except for black. And so it was, I guess, was it after George Floyd but the New York Times suddenly changed just recently to the capital B. And it really, I was sorry that Skip had passed on and never had an opportunity to know that they finally listened to him. Anyway, it was a very exciting time because we were a collective, and we trusted each other, and we were there for reasons that had nothing to do with us individually, but it was this task that just pulled us all. It was really a very special time, I thought.
Yeah, I thought so too. And that the other thing that I think came out of all the work, because the committee was a very active group of people. And were people who would step forward and say, I'll take this on. And I remember you getting at times you got some grants, and people, well, I'll do this to bring this forward, I'll do that to do. And also the getting the word out into the schools, because the schools in the Berkshires, a few of them had a small unit on either on Elizabeth Freeman. I know of one school actually that had a small unit in third grade on Elizabeth Freeman, but there were a number of people who were educators who then, put and Berkshire Country Day School worked for a full year putting educational materials together. But then there were a group of people that got that material and did professional developments with it, and got that information with these packets into the schools. And I think over the course of those 10 or 12 years, the name recognition of DuBois and some of the other people, Elizabeth Freeman, Samuel Harris, and others, became more of part of everybody's language and understanding of who these people were. And then the book that you referred to before actually ended up being a book used in the schools as a resource for understanding what the contributions, large and small, of this. I think you had mentioned it was a very small population of Blacks that lived in the Berkshires, even over all the time. I don't think it ever was more than 3%, and maybe not.
I think 10% in Pittsfield at certain times.
Yeah, but I mean as a county.
Oh, as a county, yeah, it was really very small. Yeah, so that was a special time. And from the educational standpoint, that Frances was just, she was just driven to get this full curriculum all together online. And yeah, and then of course you kind of really started that with the Berkshire Country Day School. You and Skip were working on that.
Well, I would say Skip started it. Skip really planted the seed, and I was I felt honored to be just a part of it, and to help spearhead some of the things on the ground.
Yeah, but it was it was very early in our period, so I mean there was this time where some of us were all working separately on our own projects. Like you all had no idea that we were about to name the DuBois, and that was quite by accident that you happened to go by the birth site, and we were planting, getting ready for the opening. But and so there was this sort of serendipity. We all kind of met each other at this kind of critical moment, and
where DuBois was born.
Yes, right. Where
he was another was this from the grave that
you did kind of feel it, yeah. And we have on occasion read that speech that he gave just a month ago or a couple of months ago. We had a program, a second one like that, And I think we had a dozen leaders throughout the Berkshires who have worked either with an organization or individually, and they each take a part of it. And oh, it's so moving. They were really into it. I mean, they gave it with such gusto, each one of them. I didn't know that they all had that sense of drama, but it was wonderful. And at the same time, Dennis Powell had, oh, how do I make this simple? He had made a pilgrimage with, it was an NAACP pilgrimage on the anniversary of the 1619, on the bringing over the first documented slave ship over. And there was the year of the return, and the NAACP had sponsored this from one Jamestown to the other Jamestown. And Dennis went on it, but before he went, he collected water from the Housatonic River and soils from the birth site and the ancestral home site, the Burkhart ancestral home site. And he took it over and he deposited the water and in the soils and so forth. And then he collected water from, it's the last body of water that these captured Africans bathed in. It's called the Last Bath, I think, the Last Bath River. And he collected water from there. And at that event that we had, he discharged it into the Housatonic River. So there was this exchange of river. And oh God, it broke my heart when he said it. He said, and there are little flecks of something like gold that he thought were from the remains of people who died there or took their lives there. It was just a shattering story that he told about that site. So we've had an exchange of water as well. And, we try to make these places of our more than just an abstract memory, but that they become memories that become part of our daily lives and a part of the sense of place that we have when we walk through these places, that they really that they're very vivid and as you say, that it just becomes part of our regular understanding of who we are and where we are.
Could I also just say that Dennis Powell's is the president, I believe, of the
Yes.
NAACP of the Berkshires? I know it's out of
the Berkshires,
right?
And he's very active, and he is he's quite a teacher, and his sense of integrity and honesty without anger is just as hard as it is. I mean, he's confronting some really difficult situations. It's so impressive. I just look up to him in so many ways. Anyway, I was just thinking while you were saying that the Berkshires, I think before our group came on the scene, was really known for Hawthorne and Melville and who did the French? It was the French that did the Lincoln statue, and without any recognition at all of this incredible history. And it wasn't just one period of African Americans. It was an eye opener to all of us. Anyway,
and it continues today. I mean, with people, Elaine Gunn is not still with us, but certainly that, her commitment to really having a full story told. And she was a teacher, a local teacher, as well as an activist.
Right.
And Ray Gunn and his work with
With,
who was a cousin of Elaine's.
yes,
His work
not
with
a brother or a husband, but a cousin. Yeah, we always have to remember that.
and his work with the AME Zion Church and getting that to be a museum, and also
Well,
the DuBois legacy, and having that be in the world and known and recognized and honored.
yeah, it's the DuBois Center of Freedom and Democracy. It's becoming an institution as this church is being the body of the church, the building itself is being restored from mold, and it was very difficult with this small community to keep this very historic church going. And so with quite a bit of national funding, as well as local people volunteering and donating, it's coming to be both the building to be restored, and with a huge interpretive center, and really looking to be the visitor center that had been proposed for Great Barrington. This is the so-called Michael Singer plan, where he had come out to kind of look at the home site while we were bringing it out of the vines. And it was very clear to him that this was only part of the story, that the real story took place through all of Great Barrington. And so there's a vision plan, a 50-page vision plan that puts the whole story together as one entity called the National Historic Site, which is all of these sites. And it called for a visitor center, and the place where you would start, you would get your information, there'd be the full interpretation, and that will be one of the aspects of one of the functions of the DuBois Center of Freedom and of Justice and Freedom. Oh, I should remember that, which way it goes. It's the DuBois Freedom Center for short. And so that, it's going to really come into its own. And for many of us, it's a very personal, it's quite personal because of our affection for the Reverend Esther Dozier, who was the first female pastor and really essentially the last pastor of the church before she died. And it was really Esther who, in our period, resurrected the whole idea of celebrating Du Bois. She was, I think she had held one Du Bois birthday celebration the year before we dedicated the trail. And so, we all joined forces, and there was every year a birthday celebration. And when the archaeology was going on at the home site, those artifacts were processed at the church. It became a real center. So, and it was completely kept alive by Reverend Dozier. And so for many of us who just cherished her being in every way, it's personal. I don't know how else to put it.
She also brought the Jubilee Singers, not the Jubilee Singers, the Jubilee School
in Philadelphia.
From Philadelphia.
And they kind of jump-started it. They went to the town. They didn't know to come to the Riverwalk. They could have, but they didn't. And nobody told them about it. And the town had nothing to do with it. And I mean, he was really shunned for many years, and there's still, well, we won't go into that. This is a positive
Well, just to
conversation.
say though, that there's been a lot to overcome in terms of people's very set
Yeah.
mindset. But that many people, well, now they have is it the middle school in Great Barrington?
Yes, it finally got named. We tried it and didn't happen, but it finally got named. So there is the DuBois Middle School. And yeah, I mean, it's now it's okay, but there's still pockets. I can tell you, there's still pockets. He was the issues that he was blamed for had to do with his denying his citizenship when he went to Ghana, which is patently untrue. It was that he was quite old when he went to Ghana, but he never went to the embassy, and it was expedient for the State Department to just end it, his citizenship, but he did not do it. And he struggled for a long time about that because, his wife was buried here and his children were, I mean, it was difficult for him. And that he had joined the Communist Party, which is true, right before he left. But I put that in the same, first of all, the communists were the only group that stood by him through all of his advocacy work. And, if you're going to chastise him, then you're going to have to chastise Paul Robeson. They traveled together. They were in the same school. So, yeah, I mean, but who knows what, as I say, we're having a happy talk here today, so we won't go too much into it, but it was a lot of adversity to overcome. I think because I was new to the area and because I really didn't know that history when I started, I just sort of naively jumped in the same way I jumped into the river. I didn't know, its history of people being afraid if you put your foot in the river, it would start glowing because of the PCBs. I didn't grow up with that stigma. I could just see a lot of trash that needed to be picked up, and only gradually came to understand how bad the river had become, but also how important it was, particularly to young people growing up here. I know I played in one that was pretty polluted also when I was a child until my father just yanked me out of it. So
including the children, because you included the schools in that cleanup.
Oh yeah, it was almost half and half. We had there were two Steiner school teachers, and they have the same class from 7th grade till graduation, and they came every year. And then the Searle school, which was literally, you look out the window and it's right there, and they would just walk out the door and work every year. And all kinds of different schools came, and yeah, it was great. Those are great days, and I'm too old to do it now, but it was great when I could. So
Rachel, let's end it on that note, but thank you so much both for this interview today and also for your ability to bring people together to hold a vision over years, to help other people who had held a vision over many, many years, to bring that to fruition. And it all is good work and well done.
well, thank you. It was fun reminiscing with you, Ellen, because you were there at almost every step of the way. So, okay, good to see you.
Nice to see you. And for the Inspired Living with Ellen Broderick, thank you all for joining us, and look forward to seeing you next week. Bye-bye.